So, for almost a decade now, Russian interference has been a huge topic in American elections. But here's the thing, the playbook they use isn't some dusty old manual. You gotta think of it more like a piece of software that's constantly getting updates, adopting, evolving, and honestly getting a lot smarter. Okay, let's dive into this and break down exactly how these tactics have shifted based on years of US intelligence reports. To really get what's going on here, we have to start with the why. I mean, it's easy to look at all this and think the only goal was to help one person win and another person lose. But according to the intelligence community, that was only part of a much bigger and way more destructive plan. And what U.S. intelligence found, report after report, is that this plan was never just about one election night. It was a three-part strategy, and it was designed from the very beginning to cause maximum damage. Okay, so you see these first 2 points, right? Hurt one candidate, help the other. That makes sense. But it's this third one that's the real kicker. The long game wasn't just about who sat in the Oval Office. The real prize was to make Americans doubt their own democracy. The chaos, the arguments, the distrust, that was the ultimate win. All right, let's rewind to 2016 and see how this all kicked off. I want you to think about this interference campaign like it's a computer virus. Well, the 2016 version was like a first-generation virus. It was loud, it was messy, a total blunt force attack. It wasn't subtle at all, but wow, did it get the job done. And the main weapon they used for this attack was something called the Internet Research Agency, or the IRA. Now, this was not just a couple of hackers in a basement. No, no. This was a well-funded, state-connected troll farm in St. Petersburg, and their entire job was to run this massive, multi-million-dollar war of information by just pretending to be regular Americans on the internet. So how on earth did they pull that off? This is where it gets kind of genius, in a pretty sinister way. The IRA didn't just storm in with angry political posts. Nope. They played the long game. They started by making social media pages about stuff everybody loves, totally non-political things, like the Muppets, and they used that to quietly build up these huge, trusting audiences. And once they had millions of followers who, just liked their funny memes and trusted their content, that's when they flipped the switch. The same page you followed for a laugh suddenly starts pushing super divisive political stuff. They weaponized that trust to inject their real message, which was targeting very specific groups of voters and trying to convince them to just stay home on election day. And they were incredibly specific about who they targeted. This quote from the U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee report says it all. It was unambiguous. African Americans were their #1 target. They would create pages like Blacktivist, and they'd share content about very real, legitimate issues like police brutality. They'd build what felt like an authentic community, and then they'd use that platform to push messages telling those same voters to just boycott the election. So when you put it all together, the 2016 attack was a full-spectrum assault. You had the famous hack and leak operations against the DNC and John Podesta. You had this massive social media campaign that reached something like 126 million Americans on Facebook alone. At the same time, they were probing election systems in all 50 states. And get this, they even organized actual real-life rallies in swing states like Florida. But, after 2016, the US and the big social media companies weren't just going to sit there. They started building defenses. They got way better at spotting fake accounts. And so, the virus, it had to mutate. The playbook had to evolve to get stealthier, more subtle, and you could argue, even more dangerous. And this timeline right here, it lays out that evolution perfectly. You can see it clear as day. We go from the sledgehammer approach of 2016 to this sneakier information laundering in 2020, and then all the way to a super sophisticated campaign using AI and real American influencers in 2024. In 2020, the new tactic was something called information laundering. Instead of Russian trolls creating all the content themselves, Kremlin-backed actors started using proxies, like a pro-Russian Ukrainian lawmaker named Andrei Derkach, to inject their stories directly into the American political and media world. The goal was to get real American sources to pick up the stories and spread them, giving them a stamp of legitimacy. By 2024, the playbook takes another massive leap. This is the era of what you could call the deepfake virus. Russia was now using generative AI to create incredibly convincing fake audio and video. But the real game changer was when they started co-opting the voices of real Americans. That made their propaganda almost impossible to tell apart from actual, homegrown political debate. And they backed this new strategy with some serious cash. In the lead up to 2024, intelligence officials actually tracked nearly $10 million being funneled from the Russian state media company RT to a company based in the US. And that money was then used to pay popular conservative American influencers to spread pro-Kremlin talking points, often without them even knowing where the narratives came from. This chart just makes the whole evolution so clear, doesn't it? In 2016, you have content being made by trolls in a building in St. Petersburg. By 2024, it's being generated by AI, and even by unwitting Americans. The method went from direct, sometimes clumsy disinformation to this slick laundering through trusted voices. They literally went from using fake social media accounts to just co-opting real ones. Okay, so after all of this, these huge, multi-year, multi-million-dollar campaigns, you have to be asking, right? Was there ever any legal accountability? Did anyone actually face justice for any of this? Well, on paper, it kind of looks like it. Special counsel Robert Mueller did secure indictments against 25 Russian nationals and 3 different Russian companies. But then, you look at that last bar. Because Russia won't extradite its own citizens to the US, the number of those Russian defendants who have ever actually been prosecuted in an American court is a big fat 0. In fact, in one of the most high-profile cases, the Department of Justice actually dropped its own charges against a key Russian firm. And you're probably thinking, why on earth would they do that? Well, prosecutors described it as a high-stakes poker game. The Russian company had no people or assets here it could lose, so it was basically playing with house money. It was just using the legal process to try and see the US's hand, our sensitive intelligence sources and methods. The DOJ decided it was better to just fold the hand than reveal how we track them. And while none of the Russian actors were ever prosecuted, it is a key part of the story that several American figures who were convicted of crimes like lying to investigators during the probe, people like Paul Manafort, Roger Stone, and Michael Flynn, were later given full presidential pardons by President Trump. And all of this leads us right back to one final, really critical question. The interference playbook is constantly getting smarter, stealthier, and more deeply woven into our own media. The virus just keeps evolving. So the question for all of us is, can our defenses and can our democracy itself evolve fast enough to keep up?